Hey, welcome back to the third video of the CAA, and I'm going to try to keep these as manageable as possible and on point since we are talking about basically each of the workflows, and we'll kind of cover these pretty quickly, the examples here, and I'm only going to modify a few of these so that we can kind of see, again, how these things work and what we've done. So, first of all, let me pull over this postman here. And we're going to kind of do a couple things, and I don't know if I can line these up. Let's see if we can do this. Sorry, I should have done this. Okay, I just need a little bit of something that I can see there, and then we can kind of move this over. All right, so in that Get Subnet here, again, I modify the node. It's a post. I don't like the way they did this, so I always do everything with post because I expect that I'm going to post JSON at any given point, and there's only one exception, and I'm going to cover that one exception at a different video and how we might tie in with other applications that don't have logins using a service account and then simply passing parameters on a URL that we'll pull in as main values. And I'm going to show that later on, a simple way of doing that. So here, back to this Get Subnet, we modify it, make it a post. We go right to our login. Now I'm going to change the output to credentials. It goes right into the Get block, and the Get block has a particular input format that it needs. And we're going to go up here to Get Subnet. And that particular format, and if we look at the documentation for it up here, and resizing, I need a bigger desktop. All right, so with this, you have the option that A, when we get the block, we can get the stats. Now, I talked about before, when we go out and do exports, it does not include the stats. There was an API to get the stats, and that is what this particular API does. Secondly, we have the inputs, which it expects an address, in this case, a container only if it's not unique. So if you do not have overlapping addresses or subnets, that's not a concern. You would typically just uh, leave that off, and we should be fine because it can identify it. The raw container, I think you might still pass that. I think I am here, but it's okay. And then the size and the status. The status is deployed, reserved, fully assigned. And what we want to do with that is we're going to do that same input. Here's my URL. We're going to change that to the workflow IPC Get Subnet, and we're going to pass it this information, and we'll just tell it send. And that's going to give us back all of the details in a single object template that we can then process through a script or other function and say, here are the details. And it's including all of the instant stats that go along with it for the utilization. So that's a good get. And now if you had applications that could go out and get this, pull the stats in, and then do something else with that. I'm not going to go through the deletes and modifies and stuff like that yet. We'll come back to maybe some of these. The modify basically is but on that parameter, you basically pass it in the input details that you want to modify, and then it handles it. But it's a little bit more detailed, so we'll come back to that. Now, add subnet, I went ahead and modified as well. So in the post, I changed this to post. It might have been a put. I added the documentation here so I could see this is add subnet. And now with this particular one, I left this the way it was because it works. So it takes the payload. This then handles the payload in the rec body and does some things to change it. And then down here, it goes and does some checks where in the default one, it had just simply, if this had next, which is what I'm going to do, in this particular case, it would pass out. So there are two different add subnets. They have one for add subnet to show you without the next if you had an actual IP, and there's one that has just simply the word next, but it's the same node. So effectively, I took that off. So if it does not equal next, you're okay with that. And so what we have when we pass this in, we're going to pass in some details. This then is going to set the payload back to the body and address, and then it's going to go ahead and run our add subnet. Now the input for this is very similar. We have again our username password, and we're going to come back to this again later. But now we're going to use container because we must know the container name. And so here we are going to use container and raw container. The container, I'm going to use the demo site that we created here and import that subnet there. The type is the block type, and this is going to match the block type here. So that's what we're going to tell it to auto allocate, and the size. And it's going to give us the next available deployed block, and the address is next. If I wanted to put in a specific subnet, I would enter that here, and that's what this particular API intended. But, hey, I've already got the policy set up, so why not just use next? And you can use just a single API. There's no reason to have both, and you can have it check for both. And what we expect to see then is just going to give us the next available subnet, and that's all it does, 10950, and that's it. Now, in this particular node, if we go take a look at this, I don't think, yeah, so that's it. It's just going to give us the subnet, and then if we wanted to do a get, we could go out and get that subnet detail. So from my perspective, kind of what we talked about, I think in some of the others, that you had this add subnet, the next, and then it would give you the full detail. You had to go out and get it and pull some other detail into it. So this is one particular case here, and that might be what that other address is doing here, but I doubt it. So the next subnet, add next subnet, should be the same thing. I don't believe it returns anything differently, just the same process, and gives you back the subnet, and that's all the payload is. So if you look at the documentation, it tells you what it's going to output. Right? So the idea then is that you would take that, you would go out and do a get block, passing it in that subnet name and pulling back the details for it. Get device, again, I modified this, changed to a post so I could post my details, and then added our documentation. Login, change the credentials. I'm debugging this, but the get device now is just being able to pull a device too. So we're just pulling it, get the device information based on the input, and it's looking for IP address and container if it's in a overlapping network. So that's a real simple one here. And if we just kind of run this here with the get, I can tell the container, raw container, and it's going to give us the full structure of the IP address, all of its interfaces, data, ID, type, etc. So now, if I wanted to modify this, I could take this full JSON, modify its attributes or something like description or name, etc. And then I could import that with the modify, and it would then modify that device. So passing it into this API, I could then modify it. And we'll come back in and maybe do that here in a little bit so you can just see how you do the resource records or name or other things. And then we can go into add device. So in the add device, it's the same thing as a subnet. There's an add and there's like a next. And with this particular input, we allow you to specify the simple format of the IP, which I'm going to show you, where before we did the interfaces. So in this particular import device, it goes in and tells us what it needs. And these are the fields, and it either expects that you have an IP address, and I think it tells us here, you have an IP address or you have the address type and an interface. So you have to have one of those or it's going to fail, one or the other. And I'm going to do the simple one because before I did the interface. So with the add device, real simple input, I'm not going to do the interfaces in that complex JSON, just to remind you, this piece. This is going to give me more options though. So if I want to use an import devices format, I have these other formats for the instant DDNS, and I can, I think, use the same import with this format structure, and we'll come back and test that. But this is the easy format, and this is IP address, the subnet, from start or from end. Your domain type, if you're doing DNS, mine's internal. Description, host name, which I'm doing the naming policy, but I could override it. Device type, static is the address type, and then my domain. So I could hit this, hit submit, it'll give me the next available address. And this particular node has an option. Return only the IP like it did in the subnet we saw previous, or the full device, where it goes out and gets it after it adds it. And I chose full, so now it's pulling the full device. So that was, just a couple real simple APIs. And just want to walk through those, keep this real simple here. But when we start getting back into the deletes are real simple as well, but getting back into the modifies, that might be then where we want to go over the details more so you understand that process. But I'm going to end this process, end the video here, and then we'll come back to another video and go through those other details. Take care. See you again.